Chapter 74, The Sperm Whale's Head, Contrasted View. Here now are two great whales laying their heads together. Let us join them and lay together our own. Of the grand order of folio leviathans, the sperm whale and the right whale are by far the most noteworthy. They are the only whales regularly hunted by man. To the Nantucketer they present two extremes of all known varieties of whale. As to the external difference between them is mainly observable in their heads, and as the head of each is in its moment hanging from the Pequod's side, and as we may freely go from one to the other, by merely stepping across the deck, where I should like to know will you obtain a better chance to study practical cetology than here. In the first place, you are struck by the general contrast between these heads. Both are massive enough in all conscience, but there is a certain mathematical symmetry in the sperm whales which the right whale's sadly lacks. There is more character in the sperm whale's head. As you behold it, you involuntarily yield the immense superiority to him, in point of pervading dignity. In the present instance, too, this dignity is heightened by the pepper and salt color of his head at the summit, giving token of advanced age and large experience. In short, he is what the fishermen technically call a gray-headed whale. Let us now note that it is at least dissimilar that these two heads, namely, the two most important organs, the eye and the ear. Far back on the side of the head and low down near the angle of either whale's jaw, if you narrowly search, you will at last see a lashless eye, which you would fancy to be a young colt's eye, so out of all proportion is it to the magnitude of the head. Now, from this peculiar sideway position of the whale's eyes, it is plain that he can never see an object which is exactly ahead, no more than he can see one exactly astern. In a word, the position of the whale's eyes correspond to that of a man's ears, and you may fancy for yourself how it would fare with you did you sideways survey objects through your ears. You would find that you could only command some 30 degrees of vision in advance of the straight side line of sight, and about 30 more behind it. If your bitterest foe were walking straight towards you with a dagger uplifted in broad day, you would not be able to see him, any more than if he were stealing upon you from behind. In a word, you would have two backs, so to speak, but at the same time also two fronts, side fronts. For what is it that makes the front of a man? What indeed but his eyes? Moreover, while in most animals I can now think of, the eyes are so planted as imperceptibly to blend their visual power, so as to produce one picture and not two in the brain. The peculiar position of the whale's eyes, effectually divided as they are by many cubic feet of solid head, which towers between them like a great mountain separating two lakes and valleys. This, of course, must wholly separate the impressions which each independent organ imparts. The whale, therefore, must see one distant picture on this side, and another distant picture on that side, while all between must be profound darkness and nothingness to him. Man may, in effect, be said to look out from the world from a sentry box with two jointed sashes for his window. But the whale, these two sashes are separately inserted, making two distinct windows, but sadly impairing the view. This peculiarity of the whale's eyes is a thing to be borne in mind in the fishery, and to be remembered by the reader in some subsequent scenes. A curious and most puzzling question might be started concerning this visual matter as touching the Leviathan, but I must be content with a hint. So long as a man's eyes are open in the light, the act of seeing is involuntary. That is, he cannot help mechanically seeing whatever objects are before him. Nevertheless, anyone's experience will teach him that though he can take an indiscriminating sweep of things at one glance, it is quite impossible for him attentively and completely to examine any two things, however large or however small, at one and the same instant of time. Never mind if they lie side by side and touch each other. But if you now come to separate these two objects and surround each by a circle of profound darkness, then, in order to see one of them in such a manner as to bring your mind to bear on it, the other will be utterly excluded from your contemporary consciousness. How is it, then, with the whale? True, both his eyes in themselves must simultaneously act, but his brain is so much more comprehensive, combining, and subtle than man's, that he can at the same moment of time attentively examine two distinct prospects, one from one side of him and the other from an exactly opposite direction. If he can, then it is a marvelous thing to him, as if a man were able to simultaneously go through the demonstrations of two distinct problems in Euclid. Nor, strictly investigating, is there any incongruity in this comparison. It may be but an idle whim, but it always has seemed to me that the extraordinary vacillations of movement displayed by some whales when beset by 3 or 4 boats, the timidity and liability to queer frights so common to such whales, I think that all this indirectly proceeds from the helpless perplexity of volition, in which their divided and diametrically opposite powers of vision must involve them. But the ear of the whale is full as curious as the eye. If you were an entire stranger to their race, you might hunt over these two heads for hours and never discover that organ. The ear has no external leaf whatever, and into the hole itself you can hardly insert a quill, so wondrously minute is it. It is lodged a little behind the eye. With respect to their ears, this important difference is to be observed between the sperm whale and the right. While the ear of the former has an external opening, that of the latter is entirely and evenly covered over with a membrane, so as to be quite imperceptible from without. It is not curious that so vast a being as the whale should see the world through so small an eye, and hear the thunder through an ear which is smaller than a hare's. But if his eyes were as broad as the lens of Herschel's great telescope, and his ears capacious as the porches of cathedrals, would that make him any longer of sight or sharper of hearing? Not at all. Why then do you try to enlarge your mind, subtilize it? Let us now, with whatever levers and steam engines we have at hand, cant over the sperm whale's head, that it might lie bottom up. Then, ascending by a ladder to the summit, have a peep down the mouth. And were it not that the body is now completely separated from it, with a lantern we might descend into the great Kentucky mammoth cave of his stomach. But let us hold on here by his tooth, and look about where we are. What a really beautiful and chaste-looking mouth! From floor to ceiling lined, or rather papered, with glistening white membrane, glossy as Brysol's satins. But come out now and look at this portentous lower jaw, which seems to be a long, narrow lid of an immense snuff-box, with a hinge at one end instead of one side. If you pry it up so as to get overhead and expose its rows of teeth, it seems a terrific portcullis, and such, alas, it proves to many a poor wight in the fishery, upon whom these spikes fall with impaling force. But far more terrible is it to behold when fathoms down in the sea you see some sulky whale floating there suspended with his prodigious jaw, some 15 feet long, hanging straight down at right angles with his body, for all the world like a ship's jib boom. This whale is not dead, he is only dispirited, out of sorts perhaps, hypochondriac, and so supine, that the hinges of his jaw have relaxed, leaving him there in that ungainly sort of plight, a reproach to all his tribe, who must, no doubt, imprecate lockjaws upon him. In most cases, this lower jaw, being easily unhinged by practised artists, is disengaged and hoisted on deck for the purpose of extracting the ivory teeth, and furnishing a supply of that hard white whalebone, with which the fishermen fashion all sorts of curious articles, including canes, umbrella stocks, and handles to riding whips. With a long, weary hoist, the jaw is dragged aboard as if it were an anchor, and when the proper time comes, some few days after the other work, Queequeg, Daggoo, and Teshtigo, being all accomplished dentists, are set to drawing teeth. With a keen cutting spade, Queequeg lances the gums, then the jaw is lashed down to the ring bolts, and a tackle being rigged from aloft, they drag out these teeth, as a Michigan oxen drags stumps of old oak out of wild woodlands. There are generally 42 teeth in all, in old whales much worn down, but undecayed, nor filled after our artificial fashion. The jaw is afterwards sawn into slabs and piled away like joists for building houses. This is the end of chapter 74. So he talks about how small the ear is on the sperm whale, and how the right whale's ears are just covered over. The thing is that whales have incredibly good hearing. They're like a lot of the, oh, well, whales have sonar like dolphins do, and it allows them to see with the sound of things. So they make clicking noises or noises of various sorts, and the sound goes out, bounces off of things, and comes back, and the whales are able to get a sense of what things are by the sounds that come back. And studies have been done with dolphins where dolphins can tell the difference between different types of metal. So you take an iron plate and an aluminum plate and you put it in the water and teach the dolphin, okay, hit the aluminum plate, and they go after the aluminum plate because they can hear the difference between the two of them. So that's really kind of cool. But anyway, he talks about the sperm whale and the sperm whale's teeth and how those are used for ivory, and how the jawbone is sawed into slabs and piled away for purpose. Well, it said the pequod in the early chapters. He said the pequod was very much made out of whale bone. So, if a piece of board broke, they replaced it with whalebone. So this is a ship that, they're carrying along whalebone that they can use to repair boats. They can use to repair the ship. They can use maybe to make barrels. I don't know if they have a Cooper on. I can't remember if they have a Cooper on board. Also talked about the position of the eyes, how the eyes of the whale are on the side of the head. And that's kind of like a cow or a deer. Herbivores tend to have eyes on the side of their head, which gives them this really broad view. Now, it's not exactly on the side with it like a deer, but it's more to the side than it is with people, because people have the eyes straight ahead, and that gives us good depth perception. And that allows us to see something with both eyes and make a comparison and figure out how far away something is, because it's like, okay, it's this far with the left eye and this far with the right eye, and then I do a little trigonometry and I see that the computer screen is 3 feet away from me. I also reach out my hand and touch it like that. It's 3 feet away because my arm is 3 feet from... Anyway. So, the humans have eyes both facing front so that we can get good depth perception, but we can't see over here. Deer have eyes more set here, so they only have depth perception in a little tiny cone in front of them. So, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, they have depth perception, but they have this huge field of view. So in order for a deer not to see something, it has to be dead behind them. And if they turn their head a little bit as they're going, then they can catch the full 360 with only these little movements. So that gives deer an advantage in running from things. But the predators and humans, because humans are kind of built off of a predator base, because the predators have the eyes together so that they can tell how far away something is. Because, if you can only sprint for 50 feet, you don't want to go sprinting after something that's 70 feet away. Because then you get 50 feet and you're winded and you start to slow down and it just takes off. So what happens is you go a little bit, the predators have the need for depth perception, while the prey can afford to run from anything, even if it's not even all that close. Because, further away is usually better when you're running from things. So that is chapter 74.